coming from the standpoint of, as I look at the right-hand side of the screen, when I look at Rosa Gazizova, who's, I don't know, are you sitting in Moscow or at the moment, where are you?
Yeah, hi everyone. Hi Mark. I am in Moscow right now.
Okay. Well, Rosa in a way is an alum of being with me, but also Anderson and EY. We've all been in companies, not just, if you think about it, Joe Zaro has taken the CFA, the affinity groups that you can have. Not all of us, Charles, can play in the NFL, but you're in an affinity group, right? So you guys can finish each other's sentences. Or I can't believe Michael Daly's actually on here on October 15th when all of his clients are trying to file taxes, but including my own tax advisor. I hope he gets it to me here in a few minutes. I look at Chris Curtin and knowing, how you've been with us as part of, I'll just go to the slide about how we've brought this together. It really, I met Chris in 2015, but how we met came from so different angles. I did grow up in a small town called Newark, Ohio, an Ohio State fan, by the way, until I slightly changed colors, and then so part of mentors, that we've all had mentors, I hope, that have helped us, and maybe I hope to be a mentor or been one for many. And that aspect, if you can marry the power of the alumni connecting, having then been in law and finance and with the family office, which is I think the family offices, the wins are at the back, but there's a lot of responsibility with those wins and what we can do to help the world. So that's, yes, we're gonna work together and see how we can, again, this is part of that power of what we can do with these events that we did. And we went around the world, and part of our proof of concept was with Byron Alsberg sitting in the bottom left corner, who just to stay awake between Milan and St. Moritz, we were playing loud techno music from Russia. But I'll remember those days. But we went around the world, doing this to sort of build. And now, because we have relationships, now you can use technology and Zooms. So all that to say is we have so many events, and all we're trying to do now is to be that platform so that, we're this clay and you are able to mold it to do things that, whether it's Sarah's gonna, can I say it? Bring the Wayne Gretzky's and Jerry Rice and to have a really interesting showing on the documentary and have them have a Q&A with us. Or Jonathan Tepper is in the middle of the screen, who's every industry is trying to understand what's real data behind the COVID, whether it's from a virus perspective, meaning, how contagious is this and for which classes of people, the vaccine, life with COVID. This is a community that we can shed light and as you go into these breakouts later, or as even the panelists, I would ask you to, shed light, what we're not seeing in the world. And today we usually say what scares and excites you. I'll go back to the agenda. But we say today, this is less about the financial markets, but it's not. We had a really great speaker yesterday, Ed Yardini, who makes us think like without stimulus we're gonna have a V curve out of this, but obviously we all know it's a bit of a K. But some really smart people. But today sort of goes back to our tradition of how we can help each other. And part of what I would ask is everyone, I don't know if you remember this, Chris, and I'll let you start because you're part of that tradition, is to talk about a failure and how we overcome it. At Denison, we said we're liberal arts. We're not Harvard per se, but we help each other and we figure out ways to overcome because we're liberal arts. We had an education that taught us how to think. So tell us about a failure and how your liberal arts education and your Denison network helped you. But now we have more schools, but in that flavor, I'm just going to go around this room, so to speak, and let people talk about, in this COVID environment, what's been like your best or worst deal or decision, and if your network has helped you or didn't or could help you better. Take a couple minutes. I'm going to go call in some people, and I'm going to start with you, Chris, if you don't mind. By the way, we came off of a call with Todd Rupert, who wants to talk with you later. Actually, Todd might be on here. There he is.
I am. Yeah.
So Chris, tell us, 2020, I haven't spoken with you since 2015. I hope all is well with you and your family. Just introduce yourself, and share a story about a best or worst decision or deal.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you, Mark. My name is Chris Curtin. I worked at Disney for 14 years and then HP for 5. And we had, I think, 4 different CEOs during that 5-year period. So that was interesting. And then for the past 7 years, I've been Chief Digital Officer or Chief Brand Officer at Visa, which I'm transitioning out of actually this fall. In terms of the question, I was the principal lead and architect behind a major investment on behalf of the company to support some of the largest sporting events in the world. So the Olympics, FIFA World Cup, the NFL, some flanking investments and things like Hudson Yards and the Toronto Film Festival. And it was a way in which ultimately to bring differentiation to being affiliated with Visa, specifically as a cardholder of Visa, and effectively create value. So with that in mind, we had 20,000 Visa cardholders from 200 markets all over the world who were intending to go to the Olympics in Tokyo this past summer. And we had to pivot, just like the world had to pivot. And I think, if you look through it through an objective lens at that investment, in all likelihood in 2020, you would not have, because of 2020, you would not have made the investment choices that we made preceding 2020. That having been said, I think the glass half full is we're seeing, because of 2020, an accelerant of innovation, an accelerant of kind of asymmetrical thinking that I think will benefit humanity for decades to come. We're now exploring in a much more meaningful and ambitious way frictionless, touchless experiences. We're thinking about ways to bring the event to the world rather than the world to the event. And I think, for some institutions that had historically been, a little bit wedded in the department of no, every single one of these companies, regardless of their brand size or business size, is in desperate need of original thinking and entrepreneurial thinking. Doesn't matter what company it is. It could be Walmart. It could be, a 2-person micro business in Granville, Ohio. It does not matter. And I think because of that, we've opened up all sorts of doors that had historically been locked. So look, I'm glass half full. As a result of this, I think we went through a period of trying to survive 2020. And now I think the best companies in the world are looking to trampoline or catapult their way to a much better place because of 2020. So I'll pause there and hand the microphone to someone else.
That's great. So hold your questions. We'll have a period for that. So Nargis, can I call on you as I said I would? I actually don't see Nargis. Or in that case, we'll go to, how about Kolya? You're a glass half full person, aren't you?
I definitely am. Thank you guys for having me. What I would say is in thinking about I think people are more interested in the worst investment than the best investment.
Introduce yourself quickly, though.
Okay, sure. So we as a family office are heavily focused on the private markets. So we've invested in about 25 to 30 funds, and we've essentially what we like to say indexed in the index. So we've co-invested alongside some of their top deals. So generally looking for vertically focused funds, and then if we're able to build the proper relationships, which hopefully that's the goal, we're able to gain a real understanding of what their top 1 to 5 companies are and where things make sense. We like to co-invest and invest directly and provide different kinds of value that we can per deal, obviously. That being said, into the question, as I was saying, I think people are more interested in hearing about the worst deal than the best deal. I think just for compliance and for the sake of the fact that I'd like to have a long career, I don't want to mention these two companies by name, but I think, similar to just like an overall market, I think there were two companies specifically that prior to COVID, I thought, we could retire on. And now I'm thinking, wow, I'd like to just get my money back, which is really interesting. And I'm sure we've all kind of had that across the board. So one was in the overall food consumer space, and one, I can't actually say what space it is because it's really just going to narrow it down. But I'll tell you what the issue I'd made with the second one, or we had made with the second one, was there was a direct competitor on the public market. And seeing where that was trading and looking at the fundamentals of that company, a lot of the decision, candidly, was made based on a public market comparison, which I'm sure a lot of you guys are thinking, wow, that kid's really stupid. But I think the reality is that sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. I think specific to this industry, because it was a consumer-focused investment, one of the takeaways that I got from that is obviously no one can predict something like COVID, but always kind of thinking twice in terms of public market comparison. And I think the second one was really just an effect of COVID, where I would probably make the investment every single time all over again. In terms of something that I'm personally really excited about, I can just give two names that everybody on here is familiar of. We were involved in the DraftKings SPAC, and we also made a late stage pre-IPO deal into Palantir. So between those two, thank God things have been quite successful. And I guess that's the high level.
That's great. Thank you. Charles Way. You're on mute, though. You're still on mute. Continue to be on mute.
I'm sorry.
You're good. Except you just muted yourself once again.
I got it.
You got it. No, you don't.
I got it.
Hey, got it.
Thank you. All right, thanks, Mark, for having me. Really appreciate being a part of this great group. As athletes, the reason why I think it's important for me to actually be a part of a group like this is because I've made a couple of mistakes in my past trying to actually learn the process of creating wealth, and I actually was the person educating athletes on growing wealth and maintaining their wealth and making good financial decisions with their money. So for me, this is something that's near and dear to my heart, as far as making sure athletes who typically don't come from wealthy families understand the value and importance of maintaining it and growing it. And so I think one of my worst decisions, which was a very emotional decision, was a group when I was playing with the Giants. They wanted me to be a spokesperson for a fitness website, or I forget what it was now. And they actually gave me 100,000 shares. I went to the premiere or the opening and spoke, and there was a lot of people there. Everybody was excited. And this was in 2007. So imagine what happened. So I got all excited, thought this was going to be the next big tech thing, and I invested not a whole lot, but it was stupid money into this thing that doesn't exist anymore. And so knowing what I know now, and knowing that I could have had a lot more say in the company that I was invested in, which was a substantial amount, actually 10% of the company, actually. So I didn't know the influence and power and impact I could have had because of the investment. And so that was probably my worst decision. My best decision was actually starting an asset management company and getting into this space and learning and getting to know family offices and the family office structure, because now it has equipped me to do some of the things that I couldn't have done when I was playing.
That's a great segue. I'm going to call on you, Byron, so get ready. I told a story, and I introduced Byron in 2017 after our Michigan Connecting event, that I am scarred by the kind of investments that you make. I don't think family offices should make, unless you're Todd Rupert looking at 1,000 deals and having that apparatus, you're bound not to have the best best deal flow, and you don't have, you're not prepared for the A to Z run of the ups and downs and all the rest. So, but you've made those mistakes like I have, and that's why how you learn it. And I would rather give it to the experts, the funds, unless you have an unfair advantage. So we'll come back to that later. Byron, you want to introduce yourself? And
yeah, for the record, we still make those mistakes, and we do it full time and work really hard at it. So, but I'm a serial entrepreneur, accidentally turned venture capitalist. I'm also ex-semiconductor, so I guess I'm kind of a rational optimist meets the glass is half empty and full of blood kind of guy. Overall, you know, in terms of COVID, in my world, which is deep tech seed investing, it's really hard to make like a great arbitrage investment strictly from like a temporal event, like say versus a hedge fund. We got some luck based on unexpected tailwinds, but typically we're looking at 3-year entry windows for most of our investments. So in fact, I would argue, you know, we've seen a lot of deep tech for COVID, and I would argue that you might be overpaying or even investing in a company that shouldn't be receiving capital. And there's a lot of examples, for instance, in COVID testing solutions, which we see way more than too many. From a bad COVID-related investment, just a background on us, when we invest in a company, we actually invest a lot of time after the check. We're extremely active, and that's a differentiator for us. But with that said, we also have to be really careful about being too spread too thin as ex-operators that invest in these early stage companies. I had a struggling, similar to the previous speaker, I'll keep this at a high level and stay out of industries because it's pretty easy to figure out who it is. But I had a struggling portfolio company that was raising a bridge right as COVID hit. The technology was extremely promising, high pedigree founders, tech talent recruited was off the chart. The sector is in its early stages, looks like Silicon Valley in the 60s. They had a nice, great strategy to generate a lot of non-dilutive capital and non-recurring revenue, you know, until the industry was ready. Unfortunately, the CEO just wasn't performing. And he was at odds with the board and the investors. I wasn't on the board. But long story short, the company ended up running out of money. A team of investors attempted to save the company and ended up wasting just an insane amount of time. I was helping them on some of them. We tried to pay it forward with our partners and saving the plane from hitting the mountain. But frankly, I knew it as I was doing it, that it was just a pretty big time sink. That we probably shouldn't have been spending any time. So my takeaway there was COVID has catalyzed some of Darwin's work, and in companies that, you know, that should have failed, you know, they're flailing right now. They're surviving on loans from the government, et cetera. But you know, sometimes it's better to let, you know, nature do its course and take out companies like that where they're just inherently broke. From a good, you know, I invested in telemedicine solutions 5+ years ago. Obviously, they had a huge tailwind. You know, when we were investing, there was a lot of speculation about the state-to-state regulatory environment. So we did we took our pro rata in a company on a discount going into a Series B. It was standing room only. So that discount ended up resulting in a really awesome discount for our follow-on fund. And I also had a biologics company spun out of Harvard, doing NETs-related illnesses like lupus and MI, sepsis. Also ARDS, which is what COVID patients die of. So that company was catalyzed alongside vaccines and antiviral medications. We did it both as a social impact and as, you know, probably 10x plus the investment, but we catalyzed that company into trials. And so we raised quite a bit of capital to do that. well, not quite a bit. We raised capital to do that. So that was another great investment from it. Thanks.
Yeah. So unlike, although it sounds interesting that you said that you funded it, you knew it as you funded it, but we'll come back to that. Usually, my problem is I keep funding it.
Don't do that.
That's why I stopped doing that. Let's go. So Mark Jarvis, you were in a car in London. So can you come off? Can you come onto the camera?
I can. I think I can. Yes, certainly.
I mean, it is a particularly great picture that you have there, but there you are.
There we go. Yeah. No, I got out of this is my last lunch before we go into London lockdown, where we're not.
Oh yeah, I heard. What's new with that? I saw the headlines.
Yeah, Friday night. That's it. You can't go and meet anybody you don't live with.
Okay.
So that's it.
Okay.
That's it. Yeah. So
having said that,
yes, don't go down that route. No, it's just the rates have got out of control here in the UK, and it was mainly in the north of England, but now it's come down to London, and it's just like thousands and thousands of cases. So the government doesn't want to do a lockdown, like the proper lockdown. But Europe's all over the place. Paris has done a curfew from 9 p.m. till 6 a.m. We haven't gone that far, but you can go out, but you can't mix with other people from another household. So yeah, there we go.
So your best, worst decision so far?
Well, my best decision, of course, is to have retired on the 31st of December 2019. And there was the fear of missing out was a big thing. Like I would imagine all my fellow partners would be flying all over the world, enjoying their expense accounts. And of course, nobody's flown anywhere for 10 months. So looking back on that, that was a good decision to retire at that point of time. So I think the trouble is, I'm doing some charity work and some trustee boards on a few things and something at my old university, which is great stuff. And but interesting to see that the difficulties that the universities are having firsthand, and the students are having firsthand, and it's a very, very big impact on how people are dealing with this whole problem. It's you have these first-year students, and a lot of them, some of them are in campuses locked down. They're not allowed out for 2 or 3 weeks, and they're it's great student accommodation. It's lovely, a 1-bedroom studio apartment, because you're not in there much. You're always out in the bar, but suddenly you're living there. So these have been very interesting experiences for me, and what I was hoping for was a lot of lecturing and guidance, and honestly the most of the calls I've had and discussions I've had have been about around the mental health side of things and about how we're going to cope with that. So but I'm working on a couple of fundraising projects, which we touched on yesterday in the venture capital group, and it's a very different environment. People are looking at things in very different ways. I do think the online platforms are becoming very interesting. Certainly in the UK, we've been working with Cedars for quite a while on a big fundraising project, and they've just merged with Crowdcube here in the UK, which is super for us because Crowdcube has a US interface, but the online fundraising platforms have been doing very well and are continuing with that growth. So as that move to online, even my Auntie Violet in Croydon is now familiar with online ordering, whereas she'd never heard of online ordering before. Right. People are moving to that online perspective, and I from what we see in the market here in the UK, and I stress that is in the UK, the online fundraising business is, you'd think there's a summer doldrum and then how's it going and what, but it's just booming. So, so I haven't made an investment yet in 2020, but the online market is very, very receptive at the moment.
So one thing we are to that point, we're trying to knit on deal flow is having all these platforms are global. The UK has its, you've got, Techstars and Y Combinator and all the rest. So we are trying to be interconnecting with them as well. So I'll come back to that. And otherwise, you remind me, it's got my mom, who's a master at coupons.
Right.
Learning how to do this online, which is good.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. That's a great example, but everybody is moving to those online platforms.
Let's bring on some other perspectives. Jeff, could you talk maybe how Asia, what you're hearing and seeing? Jeff So.
Yeah, sure. Hi, Mark. I guess one of the decisions that I could have done better with this year was to leave New York sooner than I did, to go, move out to Asia with my family. We went out after the looting had started here in Manhattan, and things had gotten pretty sketchy. And when we got to Asia, things were running, in Korea, things were running at about 97% pre-COVID in terms of meetings were happening, business was getting done, IPOs were, coming out, investments were being made. So I guess that was one decision I should have, we should have thought about moving out there sooner. I'd say the domestic consumption that's happening out in China, the capital markets, things are really humming. I spoke with one of our private debt, private credit managers, and he's had no issues with, repayments, collections. There's some very interesting opportunities that they're looking at. So yeah, things in Asia are I feel like because the governments had moved a lot sort of swifter and took a little bit more of a harder stance on, social distancing and mask, et cetera. So things have been going well out there.
Thanks, Jeff. So I'm looking at Rob Colorina, but also Lubin was pictured. I'm curious for any, you can talk about anything, but if you could shed any light on Africa. Lubin, are you there?
Yeah, I am. Sorry, I have to apologize. I switched off because I had a very urgent call coming from work. So.
Good. Never had that ever.
Yeah, I know. I know. Yes, so Africa, I'm fully cognizant that my perspective is probably very much different from that of majority of people on this conference, simply because most of operations I'm involved in or have been involved in throughout my career have been international in the international space. So I've dedicated the past 10 years to developing infrastructure projects, specifically energy infrastructure projects in frontier markets, and the last 5 years specifically in sub-Saharan Africa, which, unless you have heard these numbers before, still to date has 600 million people living without access to electricity, as in no electricity at all. So my perspective is different in the sense that my interfaces are mostly not with public markets and mostly not with public equity markets, but rather with specialized private equity outfits working in the space and with essentially governments. Right? So I would say the two biggest risks and the two biggest volatility factors I have to face are, number one, the governments with all the strings attached. B, the mercurial nature of the owners of the business work for. So sometimes they multiply and augment each other. In terms of, again, in terms of the goods and bads, I'd say I can give you an example. It's not from 2020 because 2020 has been, I should put it, steadily dormant for us because again, there are a couple of deals which were started way before 2020 and they just keep evolving. We've heard, we've hit a snag, obviously with the slowdowns, with lockdowns, but they're still marching on. So I just can give you an example of how even with best intentions and with best laid legal framework, you still can get burned. This happened not in 2020, it's happened several years ago in Tanzania, where we ran a power plant, which was quite prominent actually in the news because President Obama announced his Power Africa initiative right on the grounds of that plant in Dar es Salaam. Typically, when you need to finance the developments of an infrastructure asset, especially in developing markets, you need to have this full project finance package, which includes obviously the offtake guarantees. In Africa, invariably your offtaker is the government or government utility.
Give it like we're giving you the Academy Awards music. So just try to, because I want to.
Sure. No, I'll just explain because again, most people do not realize it. So you need to have a government guarantee and a government-backed contract. And we had a government-backed contract for 15 years. Now, with the change in power, which occurred in Tanzania in 2015, a new president came to power who was not in favor of private ownership in the power sector. And so obviously, as with any contract, there is a way to terminate it. But if the government terminates a contract like what we had, they would be on the hook for termination compensation, which is basically buy out the plant. Now, they didn't want to do it. So essentially one day they pretended the contract never happened. Not pulling the contract, not canceling, not terminating the agreement. They just pretended it never happened. And when we said, what do you mean it never happened? Yes, here's the contract, here's the resolution of the Cabinet of Ministers approving this contract, here's the tariff approved in this contract. So yeah, we don't know. No, it never happened. And at that point of time, they already owed us $30 million. So now.
Lubin, what run to the, where are you now with that one?
It's still, it's an arbitration. It's been an arbitration for 5 years. Basically, it's a very slow process. If anyone on the call has ever been exposed to international arbitration, I have been twice. It's a very prolonged, very extended process. In the end, even when you win, you need to reinstall it through the local courts and then, get assets to compensate. So it's a very, very long process. The takeaway from this is, in any, even in the well-structured deal you have, there are inherent risks which cannot be accounted for and which can turn around and bite you in the rear.
Well, there's high risk and high reward in emerging markets. Those who know, those of us who've been there.
Yeah, Mark.
Bob, you want to add?
Yeah, I'll briefly just chime in. We've had the benefit of experience in Africa. We bought from Carlyle Europe TSL circuits in Tunisia, 1,200 jobs in Tunisia, 400 in France. We owned that asset, call it a little more than 4 years. We actually exited to a strategic from Asia. And that was sort of an excess of 15 times bagger. We had sort of a neutral in aerospace in South Africa. We bought from one of the discount airlines, their MRO.
But you're usually investing like 1 penny. Is that like a 15 cent?
Well, it was, to have 1,200 jobs, there's the revenues and the returns were good. The long and short is that, Africa is a fertile area. It's a growth area in terms of the youth, and it's diverse between sub-Saharan and northern. Switching it to this, and actually something to Ohio. I think one of the benefits of the market here is some of the onshoring and nearshoring opportunities. I think that has been discussed a couple times in the last couple months with 360, and we're seeing majority of our manufacturing is, call it 6% here in the U.S. and Canada and Mexico, and those properties are pretty white hot right now in terms of both capacity utilization and the opportunity to potentially see good deals out of it. So let me leave it at that, and unless you had something else specific you want to ask.
No, that was perfect. So I wanted to open it up. You've heard some stories of some little war stories, some ups and downs, and hopefully it's interesting that what Chris led off with. I've been hearing this theme of that this is, we could be in for a whole new renaissance. In fact, being an ex-EY person, they were talking about this enlightened new, or you guys might see it this way, we come out of this. But there are a lot of volatility risks out there. But it's interesting. Of course, you're sitting in San Francisco. You're supposed to think like that a little bit. But what do people think? What questions come out of all that? What the panelists have thrown out there? Crickets?
Well, this is Todd. I'll comment that I do think that we're going to be in a difficult situation for quite a while. But as somebody that does, as an individual who does a lot of early stage deals, as many of you do, one of the things that's been a problem is the ability to actually meet with people face to face. And when I invest in a company, I want to understand the founder's true nature, their true self, and their true self really doesn't, it doesn't really change that much, depending upon what situation they're in. It's totally consistent. And the better you know the person, the more accurately you can predict how they're going to act and react in any situation. Mm-hmm. And it's people say and do things in the most innocent situations that speak volumes for them. And during this environment where you really can't get to visit with people one-on-one and in multiple person situations, it's difficult. And I've made a couple of mistakes with people. Others, maybe it's just too early to tell, but I think that's an environment where we're going to be in for a long time.
I think another challenge in this environment is trying to do site visits to look at companies, to vet companies, and in part, everyone has a protocol, and these have a protocol of letting people into their, in my case, their plants, their offices. But then when you fly back, I live in Massachusetts, and you either have to have a coronavirus test in advance of returning, or you have to have a self-quarantine, which is just not realistic and possible. And until someone can develop a coronavirus test that can be, you can do in your home, and it takes 30 seconds for the answer, that becomes a real limiter in terms of commerce and transactions. And so you're trying to do business, but there are impediments right now of the normal flow that we're used to. And I don't know if that will delay, prolong the deal process, or if it will lead to less than favorable decision making, and being able to having to make decisions based on imperfect information or less perfect information, or if it's going to have a price increase where you're only going to make those bets at a discount. And that's all to be determined. But I'm probably looking at 2 or 3 companies right now trying to line up meetings. And I know that every time I fly back into Massachusetts, I have to have more testing done, and or self-quarantine, or just ignore it and hope nothing happens.
No, I mean, I think that's a great point. I mean, it's you know, it's many years since I've done VC work. It's 15 years since I've done VC work, but you know, the fundamental drivers was about seeing these businesses and touching them, feeling them, and sitting down and eyeballing the managing director and understanding it. And you know, I can't imagine making those decisions remotely. You know, it's better not invest in making those remotely. And you know, I remember a good friend of mine in Miami who was a VC manager. He said, you know, I'm only going to invest in companies that I can drive to within 3 hours because I want to watch them every day. And you know, it's a whole different perspective, isn't it? If you can't move there, you can't flow there. I mean, at least in the US, perhaps, and I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with the individual lockdown views, but in Europe, you know, you couldn't make a pan-European decision because every day you've got these different lockdowns on the ability to go and see them and test them and view them. It's a very difficult environment.
Well, just one tailwind of that is there's less competition. I opted to jump on a plane 2 weeks ago, and I'm joining you guys from Puerto Rico, and I think the ability to interface with people in person, it makes a commitment and difference. On the technical side, you know, you're right, James. We had to get a COVID negative test 72 hours of arrival. And then everywhere you go, temperature checks and sanitation. But I think that's going to be the new normal for a while. But you can differentiate yourself in a process or in a relationship by showing up in person. And you know, I think that's you know, that's a business choice that entrepreneurial folks will have to make. But it can make a difference. The other quick thing is that I think the importance of connectivity and things like LinkedIn, and when you see the mutual relationships, and Mark, you and 360, you guys are the master of this, that really helps drive, you know, bandwidth time, and it accelerates the trust and processing. That's never been done. I mean, that's been a little bit more unique in this environment.
I agree. I agree. Excuse me.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I agree, Mark. I think you're doing a great job, but I do think that this is very difficult to get to know someone and have nuances, but I think we need to figure out kind of how to do it as well, because this is sort of the new normal, and it does bring our global world so much closer. And so in some ways, it's brought some of us more intimately closer, but it is very hard, I think, to build a new relationship. It's going to require a whole new skill set, and I don't exactly know what that is.
I think what it does is it puts you on the 10-yard line faster. But to get, you know, across the goal line,
good point,
is a whole different, you know, game plan. And we experimented yesterday with this 5-minute. We were thinking, Joe and I have talked about just literally doing random. I can create you guys into random rooms, one-on-ones, you know, 3, 5, 10s, and you can start to meet that way, because obviously you're just getting a flavor for this. But hopefully, by the way, I do think we have an app. You can touch people, DM them, connect, form groups. I think having interactivity is part of the due diligence and part of the vetting. But, you know, obviously you've got to still be fully disciplined.
Can I say something also? I want to just respond to the Africa issue. I just want to share, and if anybody wants to contact me, that I totally agree with the fact of the villages not having electricity. I'm working with some people on a social impact investment opportunity where the villages are working with the SACOs and dealing with having the villages create their own investment funds. And they're working with the government and with NGO out there. So it's in the process if anybody wants to talk to me about it.
I was going to say, you know, tagging on to what Rob, Mark, and Todd were talking about, kind of on the other side of the table, from looking at investors, it's very difficult to when you don't have the relationship and get to know the investors. And, you know, particularly, for instance, in my case, when you're dealing with the addiction population in a very vulnerable community, it's so important that you are going into bed with investors that share and are aligned with your common vision and the social impact that you're focusing on. So I would say equally as much when you look at investors and people that you're going to be bringing in to your company, it's extremely challenging as well, because you don't want to bring them on and then suddenly realize that you're not in alignment with regard to your values, and they're focusing on incomes and not just outcomes, and and purpose and profit equally and all that kind of fun stuff. So you really need to get to know them extremely well. So I think that happens on both ends of the table.
I think just a couple thoughts from my perspective. I think there's an important distinction of established relationships versus building new relationships. Because frankly, I've discovered with my team, in some ways, I've gotten to know them better because suddenly I'm inside their house. I see their kids. I see pictures on the wall that fosters new and different kind of conversations where we connect on an even deeper level than if we're at the office. But it's where you have to your point, when you're looking at acquiring a company, hiring critical talent, where you've never met them before face to face, you haven't developed that trust, it becomes really, really critical that you find new and different ways through technology to kind of build that. And it's just not easy. And so I think the risk of hiring the wrong person because you don't know whether or not they really buy into kind of the cultural values that you're trying to develop. Or acquiring a company. Do you really, really like and trust those people? So I think, to me, I found that to be a really important distinction. An established relationship, I think I can further that through the incredible ways that I can connect through technology. It's the new ones where you can't really first build that underlying trust.
Technology is fantastic and wonderful, and social media works, but I think everybody acts a little bit different on camera than they do in person. And what I'm finding is that I'm connecting better in terms of getting a sense of who I'm working with and who I'm dealing with by just having old-fashioned private conversations on the telephone than I do necessarily on Zoom.
Okay, I'm going to make an ageist comment here because I'm nearly 60 and I'm allowed to make an ageist comment without being politically incorrect.
You're younger than me.
So a friend of mine, he works at Enoch, the Dubai oil company, and he has a son who's 14. And I was talking to him about social media and other things, and talking about the importance of meeting people. And he said, Mark, when I'm CEO of Enoch, and you're Ernst & Young, and you ring me, and you want to come and meet me, I don't want to meet you. I don't want you in my office. I want to see a hologram. I want a little. I don't want to meet you. Why would I want to meet you? I'm okay on WhatsApp and I'm looking at him and I'm thinking, you're an alien. I don't understand you.
That's kind of the younger generation. I remember one of my children.
It's so scary because I'm totally with you, Bob. I want to meet people. I want to go and have a meeting, have an argument, and then get better over a beer in the restaurant, and everything will be okay. But maybe that's not the way things are in the future.
You might be right, Mark, because one of my children was actually sitting next to one of his friends, and they were sitting next to each other, and they were texting each other. And I said, you guys are sitting next to each other. Here's a suggestion. Why don't you speak to each other?
Because you can hear them talk. That's why.
And my son
they
said,
can speak privately.
My son said, we don't do that anymore. So.
Well, I'm one of the sons. I don't know if he's talking about me. Might be me. I'll tell you, from my perspective, someone who's 25, the Zoom thing feels completely natural to me and to everyone in my age group. We've been doing FaceTime for about 4 years before any COVID struck. It's pretty normal. Actually, and this is not necessarily a business related thing, but I learn a lot about people through video games that I play with them, because it is people my age don't actually really use Facebook that much anymore, other than to watch maybe a show or two. Most of our interaction, if it's not at a bar or if it's not in person or at a school, it's through the video game. And I can spend hours with someone talking to them while playing a game and learn a lot more about them than I can at the bar having a beer with them. Because a beer is going to take maybe an hour or 2 hours, unless you're having a really good time, maybe more. When I'm playing games with someone, it can last like 4 hours. And I have friends now that I know one guy in Tennessee. I've never met him in my life, but I talk to him almost every time I get on the game because I play Call of Duty with him. And I know more about his life than I know about some of my friends that I know in the real world. So it's very different for us.
And Jonah, just picking up on that, if you're making a VC investment, does that relationship make you comfortable to be able to make an investment in that person, given your virtual relationship? You're on mute. Nah, caught you.
Okay, thank you. So it's funny you make that point. This is not someone I invested in, but someone who is definitely, someone who belongs in this group and was in this group once that I met at the New York event. His name is Chris Gersenich. And he's an avid gamer like me, probably even more so. He spent a lot more money on me than me on a lot of this hardware that you really don't need, to be honest. But instead, we had a beer once in New York, and I haven't seen him since. And he hit me up on LinkedIn, and he said, "Do you want to play a game of Call of Duty? There's a game called Warzone we play online." And we're talking about investments, and his father is very much in the oil business. We're talking about a ton of stuff that was not even related to the game. And I had 3 hours to talk with him versus if I was a Mark Sanders thing, which is amazing, I may only have 1 hour. So yeah, I think you should still meet people in real life if you can make it happen.
Right.
But there's plenty of ways that I'm finding that I can interact with someone, and you can learn a lot about a person, funny enough, based on how they play a game, actually. If they play aggressively, if they play selfishly, how much money they spend in the game. Do they buy the latest thing? Are they in a niche market? What type of game they're playing? I learn a lot about someone psychologically based on how they play, because it's so in depth at this point that it feels like an extension of someone's actual life.
Mark Jarvis, just one thing to that is that competition really makes you think clearly. In other words, if your competitor does a deal without meeting and then has a liquidity event that's amazing, those are lessons learned pretty quickly.
No, that's
yes, Rob, but maybe they just got lucky, right?
So just so you all know, we are going to transition to the breakouts, but I'm taking over the breakout control, so I need 5 minutes. I'm going to continue this organic discussion, and then we'll push a button, and I'll preface it before we do.
I wanted to match your shirt, Mark, so I put this.
Nice.
But Lubin, on that point of luck, I mean, if you're seeing transactions getting done, particularly in growth areas like in Silicon Valley and Boston and some of the international areas, some of these transactions are moving both lightning quick virtually. And so it's not luck, it's repetition. So I think, Jonah, in the gaming sector, a lot of companies are getting funded, within that are that are touchless. I'm not an expert in this, but I'm just reading the stats and the like there. So there's
I agree.
There's a GP practice to this.
I agree. There's probably a place for this, but I honestly cannot imagine that to happen in large industrials or in the energy settings. I honestly cannot, because you do need to understand who you're dealing with. You do need to understand the owners of the business. You need to see how they run business. You need to meet their team. I seriously cannot imagine how you can do this virtually.
But as you just said, even the best laid deal can go south, and we've all had them happen. So I mean,
Yeah, but you don't need to, you don't need to introduce another layer of risk into it. That's my point.
But I'm not going to not do business because I'm not leaving my house.
And I think that's the point.
I think it's relative to the nature of the deal. I think some deals that are inherently online, with the delivery system being online, the user community being online, is probably more organically relevant than something that has more of a location specific that's a requirement. So I think
Well,
that may have
Mark, I'm going to use this as a quick ad for the event that we want to do on your platform. There
Right.
is a physical component that we can add as well, and that's why I work in esports. And I discussed with Mark doing a 1-hour event with 5 speakers from my industry, explaining the difference between the physical impact and the mental, the virtual impact of the games we either do or don't invest in, as well as the sports events that we put on. We're going to try and do that in early November, probably not around the election for obvious reasons, but there's a lot to say. And I like Duncan's comment. He said video games are the new golf. They are. And you learn a lot more in a game than you do in golf, because if I play Call of Duty on the same squad as someone I might invest in, and he's a good player, or he's a team player, if he's a team player in the game and he understands strategy in the game, which is very complex, I might also assume that he has those mental capabilities in the business world. So yeah, there's some applications to playing with your potential companies that you invest in.
Jonah, but isn't it also a very well-researched phenomenon that people's personalities online differ from their true personalities? I mean, this is something.
Yeah, that exists, absolutely. That doesn't exist when, for example, Chris Gersenich, I met in real life, or I know in real life, and if he tells me something that probably you shouldn't say anonymously, and I know his gamer tag because I can track it because they're all tracked online, I know who said that. And so we're actually crossing a bridge, and that's one point with blockchain. Blockchain is not just for currency, but it's used as a distributed ledger to attach a tag to something. That's what they spoke about several days ago, with the idea that you could attach value to a painting because you can tag it. The same can be said with a username. So if Chris Gersenich doesn't use his real username, I can still attach that that's his actual information with the data that's then attached to like a blockchain system. So the idea that people can anonymously, which they still will do on like Facebook or whatnot, be what we call a keyboard warrior. That's the term we use. Someone who cannot say it to your face, but behind a screen, we call them keyboard warriors. That's going to eventually disappear, because we also have laws that are going to exist in the virtual space because of Facebook and Twitter, where there are real consequences to your actions. So eventually, right now, yes, but over the next 5 to 10 years, what you're saying will probably mostly disappear, unless you're on Reddit, which is designed to do that.
Keep going, 2 minutes.
Fascinating. I mean, really, I mean, I think that's, you know, it's scary for me, but I understand it. And, you know, I just realized that's what we need to get on with. That is the way that's going forward. And to ignore that is going to be a big mistake for people like myself.
Nehemia, are you there?
Rob, can we go ahead? I just want to get a few other perspectives as I'm just matchmaking up here.
Yeah, and that was Nehemia Kramer. If you're there, he's a blockchain and crypto investor. He might have insights. So I'm introducing him to the group, and I guess some of you guys may meet him during the breakouts. But if you're not able to speak, it's okay.
Rosa Gazizo, you're sitting in. Okay, go ahead. Get ready to speak, Rosa. But go ahead first. Go ahead, Rob. You're
okay.
guy.
Unfortunately, my camera doesn't. Sorry for that. I just dropped my phone. Anyway, my background, I was quite early, and I was lucky enough to get in first round resale of Ethereum, ETH. Right now, I'm working with Web3 Foundation, Polkadot, which I don't know if you know or not, but
Sure. Just give us to Jonah's question on the blockchain and the transaction processing. That'd be great.
Tell you what, guys, we're running out over time anyways. My crowd was trying to put it together, and I had to sort of jump in and do it. But what we're going to move on to now is you know, we're going to put you into different rooms. Actually, I'll keep that up there. Made some mergers and acquisitions here. in that I hope you don't mind. I was an EY and Anderson alum. I'm putting you together. I think some of you are both anyways. And actually, I'm going to hit a button. You're going to see what rooms you're in. We have a very large other U.S. schools, which means they'll probably end up winning the alumni contest, the way it works. We also have sort of a UK schools, rest of world schools. So I'll hit a button, but as a reminder, the agenda is basically, just go around the room, just like we did yesterday. It's just a little bit truncated, but both on the front and the back end. Everyone introduces themselves and shares your ask. What are you looking for? Are you looking for, we say with families, they're looking for 7 things. Deals, capital for their deals, talent, just trying to expand your network in a particular country or city, a crystal ball, which a little different experiences, and then your legacy. So whatever your asks are, this is your warm crowd to do it. And we'll come back at 1 o'clock, and just before, we're going to do a rapid fire little investment acumen.